So, just kind of as a heads up, next week is a conference, academic conference in Boston. Much of us at the seminary will all be in Boston. So I won't be here next Wednesday, but this morning I was able to teach on just basically some of the eschatological views for the women's Bible study. And we recorded it. So the plan is for next Wednesday, even though I won't be in person teaching, we're going to play the video. So primarily what I'm doing is talking about some of the basic eschatological positions, right, between preterism, historicism, idealist interpretation, and just kind of talking about that a little bit. My goal was to go into, I have a little talk I do on the rapture, and I was going to do that, but I just didn't have time. So eventually I'll cover that. I don't cover it typically when I go into Revelation because it's not relevant. The passages that I discuss are not in Revelation, just because I don't think it's there. So eventually I'll do that. So whatever we don't get to after tonight in our study through Revelation, we're starting again in the spring. I'm not exactly sure the dates when it starts, but once it starts up, we'll just pick up right where we left off. And then however far we get then, as long as the church will let me, I'll just keep plugging away at it. January 7th. Okay, so just a little pause for the holidays. Well, perfect. Appreciate you going with me through the long haul. I know I said this when I first started the study, but I did it in a church back in Oklahoma, the church I was a member of. I started doing Sunday. They did Sunday nights, and I started teaching through the Revelation. And 3 years later, I finished. And we were averaging about 200, 300 every Wednesday night. It just really turned into this big thing. But toward the end, I don't remember exactly at what point I was, but this retired pastor who was a member kind of cornered me in the back of the church. He said, "I know what you're doing." And I'm like, "What am I doing?" He goes, "You're trying to teach us the entire Bible through the book of Revelation." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's actually probably right." Because so much of it is based off of the Old Testament. And so unpacking it, you really do need to have a good understanding of a lot of scripture just beyond Revelation. I'm more of a long game person than a short game, right? Even though in real golf, I can't drive very far, right? But, and my putting is not good either. In fact, I'm just terrible at golf altogether. But the long game is the value of it. So it's more than just a study through the book of Revelation. It really is kind of understanding. If I were to describe how I kind of view Revelation as a whole in its place in the Bible, it is the crescendo. It is I like symphonies, right? And you have symphonies where you have movements throughout, right? And so if the whole Bible is a symphony, right, and you get to Revelation, you hear a little violin solo over there, you hear the oboe, and it just all comes together in this beautiful montage that pulls it all together, and it's just ushers us into the presence of the Lord. So I love Revelation for a lot of reasons, but well, good. Well, so since this is our last night, I'll get as far as I can. I'm not even going to try to say how far I think I want to get. We'll just go with it. So we're in chapter 2, and we're going to look at the message to the church of Pergamum. Out of all the messages to the 7 churches, the one at Pergamum is the one that I've personally spent the most time studying, thinking about. My own dissertation was really rooted in it because my dissertation work, I traced what I called the prophetic lawsuit. That I saw a lot of legal language, and it's almost set up like a trial, like a cosmic lawsuit, if you will. And part of my argument was the believers in the churches did not have legal rights. There were no laws protecting them. And so as kind of a marginalized group, they would not get a fair trial. And a lot of times when people talk about Revelation being in a time of persecution and it was so bad, what you get when you read the letters is, yes, they were facing persecution, but not all persecution is the same, right? I mean, some persecution might be you're arrested and killed, but sometimes persecution can come in other forms, like people will boycott your business, or you'll be socially ostracized, and your family will disown you, those types of forms. And when you read the 7 messages that he's addressing, he mentions hardships and trials, but the only person that lost their life was in Pergamum. His name is Antipas. So it's, I think, anticipating a time of more intense persecution. But at the time of writing, I don't think the persecution was escalated to the point that if you believe in Jesus, they're going to kill you, right? But it was moving in that direction. So there's a lot there that I'll kind of unpack for you. But when it comes to Pergamum, it's also an interesting study because people have, well, you know what? Let me just read it, and then I'll bring those things out. It says in verse 12, "To the angel of the church in Pergamum write, these are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. Yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some of you who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin, so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. Likewise, you also have those who hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Repent, therefore, otherwise I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will also give to the person a white stone with a new name on it, written on it, that no one knows except the one who receives it." So when we do the tour of the 7 cities, Pergamum to me is, especially, it's one we usually do very early in the tour, and it's the most spectacular of all of them, in my opinion. It's a wonderful place to visit. It's about 55 miles north of Izmir or Smyrna, and it's now 15 miles inland from the sea. All the coastline has extended back from where it was in the ancient world, mainly through sediment, silting that kind of produced more land. So you can now, on a clear day, see the Aegean Sea way off in the distance. But back when Pergamum was an active, important kingdom, the sea was much closer. But it was the capital of the Roman province for a number of years. The word Pergamum means citadel. And the city itself, in fact, let me just do this real quick. The city itself is set up on an outcrop, the Acropolis. So the main part of the city was sitting on top of this mountain, and the walls were so thick. Let me just see if I have a picture of the walls here. I do somewhere. I have a really good picture of the walls that I like. Okay. So that's one of the outside walls to the city of Pergamum. So not only do you have to go straight up a mountain, but then there's these massive, thick walls. Pergamum as a city was never conquered. It has never fallen. No army has ever successfully defeated it because it's impenetrable. Then that's the reason why it became such an important city. So I gave a talk last summer to a group about Pergamum and its history. It was originally a Greek city. I got so much stuff I want to share. It was originally a Greek city, and it was under the control of one of Alexander the Great's generals named Lysimachus. Now, Lysimachus's capital was in Macedonia, but their treasury, all their money, he put in Pergamum because it was so secure. And he put a steward in charge of Pergamum. And eventually, what this steward did was kind of work against him, and he allied with some people that were fighting against the Greeks, and he broke away in independence and established what was known as the Attalid Kingdom. And he himself was not a king, but he, I think it was his cousin. He had no children, the guy that did all this. But Attalus the first was then the first king of Pergamum. And so the kingdom of Pergamum spread what would have been known as Lydia. And so the region of Sardis and Philadelphia, one of these other two cities, the Pergamum kingdom extended pretty much all throughout Asia Minor. And it went through several, about 100 years or so. And the last king of Pergamum was a guy by the name of Attalus the Third. That's why they called the Attalids. And he had no children. In fact, both his wife and his mother mysteriously died, and Attalus the Third was really into botany. So they think he might have poisoned them. But anyways, he had no children. There was no heir. Now, during this time, he allied with Rome. Rome was a factor throughout the whole time. But when he died, he willed the city to Rome. So after his death, it became a Roman city. And I won't go through more details. Another thing that's famous about Pergamum, Eumenes II, who was one of the kings of Pergamum, there was a period where they were kind of in battle with Egypt. So Alexandria was a significant city, right? Cleopatra, all those people. So it was like a lot of grain came from there, but more importantly, papyrus, paper came from Egypt. And when there was kind of some disputes over there, the king said, look, let's find a better writing material. They had already used animal skins for writing materials, but they had a contest, and basically the guy that came up with the writing material that they started using was called parchment. And parchment derives its name from the city of Pergamum. So the parchment was made with the skin of a young goat, and it went through this process. So one of the things I like to do when we're there, if we have time to go to the little tourist shopping area, you can buy some parchment. I bought a little square of parchment that had the letter to Pergamum written on it. But anyway, so those are some things. It also was famous for having a library with all the scrolls in it that was considered the second largest library in the ancient world, next to the one at Alexandria, that happened to burn, and all of those books were lost. I'm still upset about that. Pergamum had a 3-story library that had who knows how many scrolls in it. So you've heard of Mark Antony, right? Okay, he was a tribune of Rome. He was one of Julius Caesar's allies. And Mark Antony married Cleopatra. Okay, just kind of put it in Roman history, about 40 BC or so. And on his way down to marry her, he went through Pergamum and plundered its library, taking all its books as a wedding gift for Cleopatra. And so all that knowledge ended up in Alexandria, and then it all burned. Who knows what we lost in that process? Sorry, it's just a moment of silence. So Pergamum has this really rich history. So when it became part of the Roman province of Asia Minor, they made it the capital. Now, eventually in the first century, the capital of Asia moved from Pergamum to Ephesus, because Ephesus was just the far larger city, more important city. But Pergamum always retained its significance. Now, it's one of the most notable things is the very first temple to an emperor, 26 BC, was built in Pergamum to the Emperor Augustus and the goddess Roma. So the imperial cult, the worship of the emperor, did not start from the emperors demanding to be worshiped. It started from the people that wanted to show their loyalty and love and respect to the emperor in Rome. Everybody thinks Rome was bad. Better road system, clean water, medical advancements, right? I mean, they were the cutting edge of technology. And so they wanted to show favor. So in AD 26, they built the first imperial cult temple. And once again, it always retained its significance as the first one. Now, by the end of the first century, there's at least 3 imperial cult temples, as well as numerous other temples. Cities competed over the right to build a temple to the emperor. And it was a thing of pride. And the title that a city would get with one of these temples was Neochorus, means temple warden. So it was a huge honor, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. The biggest question that people have with, and I'll talk about the altar of Zeus in a moment, is twice he says where Satan has his throne, where Satan lives. So then the question is, why does he refer to Pergamum as the place where Satan lives? What a lot of interpreters have done over the years is try to figure out maybe he's describing something about the city that's connected with Satan. Okay? So when we look, there's a number of suggestions. So this is just the Acropolis. Do I want to cover that? Yes, I do. This has nothing to do with the actual message to Pergamum. This actually has to do with Revelation 13. Can we turn there for a moment? I might cover Pergamum tonight and that's it, but it'll be worth it. It's sad that I've been to Pergamum so many times. Now when I go, it's like, let's go somewhere else. It just doesn't have the, I take that back. I'm always like a kid in the candy store. So in Revelation 13, you have 2 beasts. They're agents of the dragon. The dragon is identified as Satan. And the first beast rises out of the sea, likely indicating that this first beast represents some sort of like emperor figure. He's a foreigner. He's coming from the sea, right? So he's not coming from the land. The second beast comes from the land. And the first beast is the one who, receives the head wound and comes back and everybody worships this beast. The second beast is more like a priest. And what the second beast does is build a statue in honor of the first beast and forces everybody to worship that statue. Otherwise, face death and also face economic restriction. And so he forces everyone to receive a mark where they can't buy or sell. I want to talk about the statue for a moment, though. So in chapter 13, I'll begin in verse 11. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, right? Religious figure, but spoke like the dragon, right? Satanically inspired. I love that image of a false prophet. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and the inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth in order to set up an image or a statue in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give it breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It forced all people great and rich, poor, free, slave to receive the mark. Okay, so this statue. Now, if you watched people like Hal Lindsey or other kind of TV prophecy experts, and this is what I believed when I first started studying Revelation back when I was like 18, that this image of the beast that can speak and do things, they would say things like, well, this is like cable TV. They're able to see this image, i.e. an image, and it's leading the world, because how does he cause all the people around the world to worship it? Others have said that maybe it's some sort of robot that has some sort of magical powers. Some say that really it's just demonic inspiration. But lots of people have said, well, what is this talking beast? So glad you asked. This is actually from my first visit. They've done more work on this, but this is what they call the red basilica. It's called the red basilica because of the color of the bricks. But in the ancient world, it wouldn't have looked like that. The red bricks are under all the buildings, and what they do is when they build these buildings, they use bricks and marble, but then they place a marble facade around the whole thing. So panels of white marble would have coated all the way around. This was a temple just outside of Pergamum, outside of the Acropolis, that was dedicated to two Egyptian gods. Because remember, the Romans were inherently religious, and they especially loved the Egyptian gods. They felt like the Egyptians were such a powerful kingdom, and so they want to honor their gods. So Isis and Seraphis, they're twin kind of male-female gods from the Egyptian pantheon. And I wish I could express to you how massive these ruins are, right? They're huge. They tower. Okay, so we're coming in from the main doors, and if you look forward, you know, imagine a great hall, and in the center at the back is a elevated area. Do you see it back there? They've since done work on it. You can actually now walk up there and look into it and so forth. But that elevated altar, what sat upon it were two giant statues, one of Isis and one of Seraphis. So when worshipers would go in, because they have a question, a concern, something that they're concerned about, they want to know an answer to, they would go in and they'd see these statues and they would offer their prayers. Well, and then here, they've actually now have this statue set up. But this guy, I took a picture of him. He was actually recreating what one of these statues would look like. And kind of shows you, because he's basing it off of the ruins that they found around there. But here's the thing about these statues. They're hollow on the inside. They're hollow, completely hollow on the inside. Now, on this platform where those statues stood, there's an opening. And you can even see the secret tunnel that went underneath from the outside to the base of this platform. So as people would come in and they would have their prayer request, if you will, the priest would hear what they're asking for. And another priest would be underneath a statue and speak up into the base. And it gave the impression that the statue was talking to them. And so when you hear this idea of talking statues, this is something that doesn't require far-off future technology. This is something that they live with on a daily basis. Added to that, the evidence of these temples. There was a temple to Zeus, and the temple to Zeus was set up on a big rotating platform. You couldn't tell that it was rotating, but there was a lever in back that you could move it, and it would, like, as it's moving, it would kind of rumble. Well, Zeus is a god of thunder and lightning, right? Not as good as Thor, but good enough for the Greeks. And the statue would rumble, and get this, and it had an uplifted arm. In that uplifted arm, have you ever seen those rain sticks? You know, you turn them and it sounds like rain, and it's just a bunch of sticks and pebbles and marbles dropping through them. They had basically that. So here's this giant 40-foot statue of Zeus, upraised arm, and when worshipers would go in, they would hear thunder, and they could hear the sound of rain. Not only that, in the upper part of this temple, they had openings with mirrors to kind of mimic the flashing of lightning. In fact, as more and more people do research on these ancient pagan temples, they find almost all of them had some sort of automaton, like a robotic type feature to make them give the appearance of moving or doing something that impressed the worshipers. So I remember I came back from my first trip to Turkey, and it seriously, when we go there, it's far, like they've done so much good work at this site. And I always require, I was like, no, we got to go to the Red Basilica. And they're like, well, but, no, it's worth the trip, because this to me helps me understand what's happening in Revelation 13 with this talking statue that can do wonders, that deceives people to worship it. In fact, when I came back, I was sharing pictures and talking through it with my wife, and she said, well, what do you think that means for Revelation? And if there's not anything else, I think what for me, what it shows is the deceptive nature of idolatry. People worshiping these gods and goddesses, and they believe in them, they're persuaded by them, but the religion itself was also kind of feeding that through deceptive means. So once again, I think the audience in Revelation would have understood the reference to a talking statue, and understood also that it's demonically inspired and used to deceive people to worship it. But let's go back to Pergamum. So the question of Satan's throne then becomes this huge debate in scholarships. In fact, whenever I go, I was there just this summer, and I had 2 other Revelation scholars with me. And we were there, and they're like, well, Dr. Benny, what do you want to say about this? So I talked about the throne of Satan and my interpretation of it. It's not mine alone. It's just the one I think is right. And it was so funny because I shared and I gave my arguments for it. And a lot of people were like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And then the 2 other Revelation scholars were like, well, that's not how I see it, right? And we ended up like the whole way down the mountain, that's what we're debating. So people typically try to look for what could the throne of Satan be. Well, probably the most popular view is what's known as the Altar of Zeus. So perched atop this mountain was a massive temple to Zeus. And they say, well, Zeus is the chief of the false gods. Therefore, that makes the most sense for being Satan, and everybody worships him. And so here is kind of the pathway. You see where those trees are? That's where the altar of Zeus was. Here's an overhead view. So what's left of it is just the foundation. You're wondering, well, where is it? I'm so glad you asked. There was a German, he worked on a railroad that they were building there, and locals said, hey, there's this place with all these ruins. His name was Karl Humann. And so he went and he basically started all the excavations. And their goal was to take all these ruins back to Germany. So if you want to see the altar of Zeus, you have to go to Berlin. It's in the museum there. Also, the temple to Nike is also, Athena Nike is also there. So what they just left is the base. Here's an artistic rendition of what it would have looked like. And, people will point out it kind of almost looks like a throne shape. And here it is. Here's the facade of it that's now in the museum in Berlin. Also at the time, the Ottoman Empire had control, and they didn't value the ancient history. And so they let a lot of them take the stuff out. And it wasn't until later. So now there's strict laws. All ancient artifacts in Turkey stay in Turkey. You can be fined incredibly heavily, right? So in Ephesus in particular, you have guys, I got ancient coins. You want to buy ancient coins? And I told a student, I said, don't buy any coins, because if they're real, you're getting serious trouble trying to take them out of the country. You don't want that. And so he asked the guy, he said, are those real? He goes, absolutely, 100% authentic. And he goes, well, that's too bad. I can't buy them and take them out of the country then. He said, they're all fake, 100% fake. Oh, I love that. But anyway, so there's the altar. And so some people say that the altar of Zeus may be the reference to the throne of Satan. And here's just some pictures I have. This doesn't have to do with the throne of Satan. Here's the remains of the library. Keep in mind, it would have been 3 stories tall. You just have the foundation and some pillars. Sorry, I got lots of pictures of it. And that's another important temple of Athena, Nike, Athena, the goddess of victory or conquering. And it was an important, once again, if you want to see it, you have to go to Berlin. There it is. It's no longer there. So then others will say, well, maybe it's not the throne of Satan. Maybe it is the temple to the emperor. Now, the remains of the temple that are up there, very prominent, we don't know where the original temple to Augustus was. Okay, this one was built 2nd century. So the remains are from later, after the time book of Revelation. And it could have been built on top of the old temple, or it could have been somewhere else. Nobody knows. But it's still impressive because you can see it from just about anywhere. So those are, when you enter in, that's like the basement of it. And it would have been a storehouse area. There would have been, whenever you hear about it also makes great selfies and souvenir photos. It's just as impressive. I mean, this hallway, the arch, just want to point out Roman architecture. You see the arch, and at the top you have the keystone. That one's kind of dripping down a little bit. There's no mortar, no nails. It's all held there by gravity. And I would say it's probably as tall as the ceiling here, from here to the top. I mean, it's huge. So whenever you hear about eating meat sacrificed to idols, this may not have been one of the places, but at these temples, when they sacrifice animals, you got to realize there's no grocery stores. Meat is not something that people just keep in their refrigerator. And when you sacrifice a bull or some other animal, after they do the sacrifice, then they butcher the animal and sell it in the market. And most of the markets were close to the temples. So one of the big issues that early Christians were dealing with is it okay for me to eat the meat that had been sacrificed to a different god? And that became a huge ethical issue, right? Paul deals with it in Corinth. John says, don't eat meat sacrificed to an idol, because part of the worship service is you eat the meat in worship of that God. So if you come out of that background, you might think, well, this is just a delicious steak. But for them, it was also connected to that God, and eating it was part of that worship. Paul says, it's just food, right? It's nothing. Thank God for it and eat it. But if your conscience concerns you about it, don't eat it. Because if you think it's wrong and you eat it, then it's wrong for you, right? And then elsewhere he says, but if me eating meat causes my brothers or sisters to stumble in their faith, I'll just not eat meat anymore, right? So it was a big issue. And some people point out that Paul kind of had this ambivalence toward it, where John in Revelation is like, don't you dare eat that meat, right? So Christians didn't even fully agree on how do you handle this. So it would have been likely in one of these kind of stall areas where they might have been selling meat. Here's what it would have looked like at its and when it was fully, there. Now you just have some reconstruction of it from the original parts. And once again, I don't know how to classify just how grand and impressive it is to be there. But the thing I also want to point out is the opulence and the beauty and the artistry. This is not a cheap thing to do. You have skilled artisans creating this, and it also makes for good photos. So some people would then say that the altar or the throne of Satan is related to the Imperial cult temple. Clearly, the worship of the emperor. How can that not be satanic? So that's been a possibility over the years. Okay. This is what I like to call as Roman propaganda. It would have been the base that would have had a statue on it. That was a gift to the city. But I want to just kind of read for you if you don't mind. Trajan, emperor. The Tan Sebastios. Sebastios means the august one. Sebastian is a word that's equivalent to the Latin Caesar. It means the ruler, the king, the one who's deserving of respect. Germanicus, that was a title that anytime the Romans fought against the Germans, they got the title Germanicus. Okay. So Trajan, Sebastios, Germanicus, the just, okay, Tantes Gay Thalassa Kurion. Anyone? Master, Lord, Kurios. This is the word Lord, right? It's used for Jesus. Kurios Jesu. Lord of earth and sea. Right? And then it goes on to say from the council and from the bulle and demos. I know, I'm putting you all to sleep, but demos is the Greek word that means like the ruling elected council of the area. It's where we get our word democracy from, is from the Greek demos. And the Neokoron, the temple warden city, right? So reason I point that out is because when you think about imperial cult worship, the things they're ascribing to them are the things that in scriptures are only ascribed to God. So they're elevating in their worship as the one who rules all things, right? So the imperial cult temple for a long time is what I believed was the throne of Satan. I think it's a good candidate. The other thing, and this has nothing to do with the throne of Satan, it's just really cool. There's a 10,000 person theater. It's the steepest theater from the ancient world, just built onto the hillside. There it is. Isn't that really cool? And when you go there, vertigo hits you as soon as you step out you go through that little entrance at the top there, and it's just straight down. So I was there with a group of students once, and of course they immediately, as soon as we came out there, I did it the first time, but then you got to go back up, right? So I did it the first time, but then after that, I just let other people, it's like, can we go down there, Dr. Bennett? Yeah, go for it. And so they ran down those steps, which is not safe. And they get to the bottom and they're down there. The amazing thing is, I said, hey, say something to us. And you could hear every single thing that they said as if it was just like with these speakers. It's unbelievable acoustics. One little here, I'll just take you on a little journey. That's what it's like when you step out there. Right. Look at that. What a view. And then that's it looking up. I don't know if I have a good picture here. I don't. Oh, yes, I do, right here. So next to every single theater in the ancient world, this is something I've learned, there's a temple to Dionysius. The Romans called him Bacchus. Okay. He's the god of what? Wine, orgies, partying, excess, right? Even the god himself was somewhat, gender fluid. Sometimes he would appear as a man, sometimes he'd be with a woman, and sometimes he slept with men, sometimes he slept with women. He was just an all-around. What I did not know was he was the god of the theater. And that's part of the reason why, right? He could switch different roles. And so that was fitting for the theater. So there's the remains of the Temple of Dionysius. And so then that made me wonder, and I really don't have an answer for this. Since everything's connected to a god or goddess, would early Christians go to the theater? Like, we know there was debate about eating meat, but I've yet to find any sort of discussion on do they participate in things like just going to the theater to watch a good play. I have no idea. If y'all can figure it out for me, let me know. But anyways, I file that under questions that I have that I'll eventually find an answer for. And there's an artistic rendition of it. So some people see the throne of Satan as the Temple of Zeus, the Imperial cult temple. There's two others. One, some people say maybe it just refers to the city as a whole, sitting on top of that Acropolis. Maybe it's just that looks like a throne. Okay. Another candidate that a lot of people reference is it was known, it had an Asclepion. Asclepius is the god of healing. His daughter, her name is Hygienia, right? Hygiene, right? And so this was a hospital complex that was also a temple, right? And people would go there and come from all over. In fact, one of the most famous ancient doctors that people still, if they're in medical school, still study him is Galen. He was a surgeon. He wrote a lot on anatomy by basically doing autopsies on gladiators, right? And he had all kinds of stuff that he wrote. Galen practiced here for a period of time before he became the surgeon to the emperor in Rome. So some people see, now, does anybody know what Asclepius's symbol is? It's a serpent, right? So even our modern medical with the wings and the cross symbol with a serpent wrapped around it comes from Asclepius as the god of healing. And I don't know too much of the myths, but one thing we do know is that they would use snake venom, a certain type of snake that was known to have healing properties. So the symbol of the serpent. Well, a lot of people look to this as the throne of Satan because in Revelation 17:9 or 12, Satan is identified as that old serpent, the devil. So because of the symbol of serpents, some say this was probably the throne of Satan. I won't go into all the details about the Asclepion. We don't always go just for time, but it's always great to visit. Probably the coolest thing about it is one of the things that you learn is what the worshipers do when they're sick and they need healing. Is so people would come, they would go with their illnesses. They had an Odeon, which was basically a small theater for like somebody's like poetry. If they wrote a poem, they could present it to everybody there or sing a song or do something, right? So the arts and entertainment, it's really kind of think of it as a spa retreat because they would go and sleep. And everywhere there was the sound of water because they believed water had this healing. So a lot of people believe that this wasn't just physical health, it was also mental health. Because there is nothing more soothing than the sound of running water, right? So this is what's known as the healing tunnel. So like when you're going to the sleep chambers, because God heals you while you're sleeping, As you go to the sleeping chambers, you basically just have your robe, and you go down underground to this tunnel. Okay? This tunnel, and this is still running today, the water flows everywhere through this tunnel. It echoes, and you just hear the soothing sound of water running. It's really cool. Now, above, okay, so as you go down this long corridor, you'll see the light coming down from the top. There's these holes cut out of it. And so as the worshipers are going through the tunnel, there's priests up above whispering prayers and blessings over the people as they walk to the sleep chamber. Maybe praying away bad spirits or something, right? And then you come out to the sleep chamber, and once again, you can see it had water flowing throughout. Here's the sleep chamber, okay? Huge round room. I don't know if you can see it, but do you see those holes in the ceiling? Those were water pipes. And water would flow out, it cascade down like a waterfall all throughout. Seriously, if they could just recreate that, I just want to experience it. I'm not a pagan. I just think it would be really cool to see. And then when you go in, you'll see these areas. Those little areas are sleeping chambers. There's just a little stone area that probably would have had a mattress and and they sleep. And what would happen is while they're sleeping, if the God chooses to heal you, he'll appear to you in your dream. And then when you wake up, you're healed. And then when they're healed, they would have these little votives, these little clay votives that they would create over, like you find like little clay legs, ears, nose. Corinth has an interesting display of all kinds of genitalia, which tells us that Corinth had an STD problem. So they would sleep there, and that's basically what the whole thing was, right? So because of the connections, the group, this group that I went with, every time we found a cistern, they like to recreate 300 and kick the person down into it. Not really. It was all set up, but. So they try to argue, hey, this is the throne of Satan. You want my opinion? Okay, I'll give it to you. I don't think the throne of Satan refers to any building or structure in Pergamum. Pergamum is the only city where somebody lost his life. Antipas. In fact, it just by name, everybody would have known who he is. Little study on the name Antipas was not a common name. There's only one family with the name Antipas in it. The Herod family. King Herod, his sons, his father was named Antipater. Antipas is just a shortened form of that. So likely Antipas, in fact, there's a really great little fictional book written by Bruce Longnecker called Lost Letter to Pergamum. It's a story recreated. It's fantastic. It's a conversation between Luke and Antipas. And it ends with Antipas getting killed for his faith. He becomes a Christian through the book. So Antipas was likely a Roman official. He was likely a noble. He was likely somebody who had power and influence in government, who then became a believer. And he was tried, and because he refused, he was killed. So he was a public figure, and he was a Christian who was killed. That put everybody else on alert, right? Jesus refers to him as my faithful witness. That word witness is a legal term. Almost identical when we talk about a witness in a trial. Call forth your witnesses. Somebody who's testifying to something they've seen, right? It's the same term. So the word for witness in New Testament, martyria, is the same kind of legal context. So likely I think part of the connection there is he was faithful in his testimony about Jesus, and it cost him his life. So what I believe, and I'm like I said, it's not original to me, is that the reference to the throne of Satan is directly connected with the death of Antipas. And the throne of Satan is probably more of a way of saying Satan has such control over that city that he's ruling it. That resulted in the death of a follower of Christ. So more throne of Satan is, I don't think it's a physical building. I think it's more like Satan's a puppet master over all the officials and all the people there. His will is being done. All right. Well, right. I mean, people wouldn't go to a hospital if they weren't getting some sort of treatment. Something's working. Yeah. But once again, it was a hospital, so it was a mix of science, but everything was interconnected with their religion, right? Their belief system. So they were probably actually getting actual medical treatment, surgeries and healing herbs and things like that. But part of it is they believed that the mental wellness was part of the overall physical wellness. So probably the sleep and the water and all of that was part of promoting mental health as part of the wellness of the whole person. Yeah, we find throughout Scripture contests between magicians and believers all the time. There are always contests of power. So nobody denies that there would have been things that people would have seen as powerful. The claim from the kind of the Christian perspective is God alone heals. God's the only one that you should worship. But that healing can come. I mean, that's why people sought out magicians and these hospitals and so forth. They wanted to be well. It's one of the reasons why Jesus was so popular. Who wouldn't want to follow somebody who could make people who are paralyzed walk, or people who are blind see, or people who can't hear again? And Jesus did it with a word. No rituals, no magical incantations. He just made it happen. So his healing was substantially different than the healing that other people would receive. And that's one of the reasons why the masses flocked to him. But I got 7 minutes. Can I unpack the message a little bit for y'all? Okay. I didn't mean, yes, sir, in the back. Do I have a slide? I did. Go back a few slides. Thank you for asking such a great question, by the way. Because sometimes when I start waxing eloquent on all this ancient stuff, I feel like I lose everybody. But I find this stuff important. Theater, Temple of Zeus, Trajan's Temple. Believe it was, no, that's the library. No, it's right here. Right here. I found it. Nope, I don't have it. I bet Google knows. Yeah, let me know. I'm not sure if I have the dimensions of the temple in here, but if you find out, let me know. Oh, it was? I'm sure it is. Man. There we go. Hey, you're welcome. Well, let me just run through the message because there's a couple other things I want to bring out. First is the introduction of Jesus. Notice how every message has a description of Jesus. This one says the one who has the sharp double-edged sword, the sword that comes out of his mouth. That's really all it says. The reason why I think that's so important is, once again, the symbol for the judicial right of capital punishment, execution, is held by the Roman emperor alone, and the symbol is a sword, the jus gladi, the sword of justice. And so I think in here you have a contrast. Jesus is presenting himself to these people who are reeling from the death of Antipas and saying, I'm the one with the sword, not the emperor, not the governor. So it's a contrast. Who's the one you should really fear? Who's the one who's has ultimate authority? Right? Because I would imagine the Christians were unnerved and living in fear over visibly seeing this trial and execution of a public official because he followed Jesus. Right? So it's a message that's kind of reinforcing that. Now he says, basically, you've stayed faithful, except I have a few things against you. There are some who hold to the teachings of Balaam. Okay, Balaam is not the person in that city. He's using kind of an Old Testament reference to describe a false teacher. Balaam, as you know from the book of Numbers, the one with the talking donkey, right? Who the king, Balak, had hired him to curse the children of Israel. And that's why the donkey started talking, because the donkey sees this angel that's about to strike him down, and he can't see it, and the donkey's trying to steer out of the way and crushes his leg. He starts beating it. It's like, donkey, get going, right? And God has mercy on the donkey and enables it to tell him, hey, you're about to die. I'm trying to help you. Right? And then he goes up on the mountain, he sees the camp of Israel, and every time he's about to utter a curse, a blessing comes out. Right? The end of the story is a bit fuzzy in Numbers. So after he blesses them the final time, he goes away. But then later, immediately after, there's what's known as the Baal of Peor. Baal is one of the Canaanite gods. And there was an incident where all the children of Israel started worshiping at the Baal of Peor and started having, committing immorality with one another, right? Later in other scripture and in Jewish tradition, it was Balaam who built that altar. So he couldn't curse them, but he led them astray into idolatry. So what John is, by calling this false teacher Balaam, he's basically saying he's leading my people astray to worship idols by eating meat sacrificed to idols and committing sexual immorality. Those two things always go hand in hand in paganism. All right. So he calls him out by Balaam, drawing from Israel's history to say this person is just like Balaam, right? It's a code name, if you will. And then he says they also hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Likely the Nicolaitans were teaching the same thing that Balaam was teaching, and that is, in a culture surrounded with all these gods and goddesses, there's a cost to not partaking. There's a social cost. Right? It's that you don't fit in. But that's more than just not being the cool kids, right? It means that you're going to be viewed with suspicion. It means that you're going to be seen as somebody who's dangerous and aberrant. And it's going to cause family problems. It's going to cause job promotion loss, all those types of things. So following Christ in this culture, which is worship Jesus and nobody else at all, would have been a huge strain. So the false teachers, and we see this trend in Thyatira and the other places, the false teachers were essentially saying, yeah, you can partake. Eat that meat sacrificed to the idol. Go to that meeting where they're going to have orgies. It's okay. You can still be a Christian and worship Jesus and partake in this, because Jesus wouldn't want you to suffer. Jesus wouldn't want your life to be difficult. He wants you to be happy and successful. So just go along. You can do both. And that's what Jesus calls him out on. While you've been faithful to me, while you've served me, Antipas lost his life. There's some of you who are being held sway to this teaching. And so he calls them to repent, turn away from that. And then the very last thing, he gives a promise. Now, the hidden manna, once again, an Old Testament reference. The one I like to focus on is the white stone. What is the white stone that he promises to the overcomer, the victor? Lots of different views on this. Some see it as like an admission token, like to an event. They would often use stones as admission tokens. But the one that I find most interesting is because it's a white stone. In the Damas, the Bole and the Damas, they're like kind of the town council. In trials where they're voting, kind of like a jury, if you will, they would have a black stone and a white stone. If they were convicting them and calling them guilty, they drop the black stone in the vase. But if they were innocent, they were acquitted, they would drop a white stone. Pergamum is also a place where onyx has been mined. And onyx comes in a variety of colors. Every time I go, I buy a white onyx stone. And here's why, and I'll leave you with this. He says, I'm going to give you a white stone, which I would say is an innocent verdict. You're not guilty. With a new name. My name, Alan Bandy, while you might respect me, my name has been marred by sin. There was a time before I came to Christ as a teenager that I lied, I stole. Nobody could trust me. My parents couldn't trust me. My teachers hated me. I was expelled from school. My mom kicked me out. My dad kicked me out. I had a reputation. In fact, even in elementary school, one of my friends, because I kind of motivated some of my friends to do something that was immoral. And one of my friends came to me one day at school and said, look, if you ever come over to my house, your name is Kevin. Because my mom hates this Alan guy. There's going to be a day when I am made whole and new in Christ. And I will have a new name. That's what he does. He forgives, he makes new, and he declares us innocent. Not because of what we have done, but because of what he has done. So every time I go, I get a white stone. The first time I did this, I just bought it secretly. I didn't. But then in our evening kind of debriefing, I shared just what I just shared there. And the next day they're like, Dr. Bandy, why didn't you tell us? We all want a white stone. So now all my groups come home with like white stones because of that. But there's truth in that. I am declared innocent by Christ, but one day I will be brand new and will have a new name that he alone gives me. Let me pray for you and we can go. Lord, thank you so much for the study. Thank you for your word. Help us to live as faithful witnesses. Help us to hold on to the hope that we can only find in you. And while the world screams at us to comply and to fit in, may we dare to live boldly in you. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. See y'all in January. But if you come next week, you'll watch a video of me. which I'm sorry in advance.